My grandmother's final words were a cryptic whisper. Check the back of the frames. I am 27 years old, and I will never forget the moment my grandmother gripped my hand in that sterile hospital room. The antiseptic smell hung in the air as the heart monitor beeped slowly beside us. Before I tell you what I discovered behind those frames, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. After my mother left when I was just 4 years old and my father had to work out of state to support us, Grandma Martha became everything to me. Every afternoon after school, we would bake together in her tiny kitchen. On rainy days, we would sit by the window as she told me stories about life, carefully avoiding any tales about her youth or where she came from. Grandma had an obsession with framing family photos. Our house was filled with them, hanging on every wall, standing on every surface. Most were recent, mostly of me growing up or of my father. Very few showed her when she was younger. Some memories are better left in the past, sweetheart, she would say, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. As a child, I accepted this answer, but as I grew older, I wondered about the shadows that seemed to follow her. What struck me as odd was how little I knew about her family. No cousins or siblings ever visited. No old friends called. It was as if her life began when she married my grandfather, who had passed away before I was born. Even my father knew surprisingly little about his own mother's background. The doctors gave her 6 months, but the disease moved faster than anyone expected. Those final months were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and whispered conversations with doctors in hallways. They cannot find it, she would mutter in her morphine haze. Not safe, never safe. Once I caught her trying to get out of bed in the middle of the night. There is not much time left. How wrong I was. I was sitting beside her reading her favorite poetry book when her breathing changed. I looked up to find her staring at me with complete clarity, a stark contrast to the confusion of recent days. Listen carefully. When I am gone, check the back of the frames. All of them. Start with the one of us at your 5th birthday. Her fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. Then she whispered those final words again. The funeral was small, just as Grandma had requested. When I tried to approach him after the service, he quickly turned and walked out. Probably someone from the neighborhood, he said dismissively, but I caught something in his expression that made me wonder if he knew more than he was saying. After the funeral, my father surprised me by saying he needed to return to work immediately. The company cannot spare me any longer. But what about going through Grandma's things? I asked. Just donate what you do not want and sell the rest. The house needs to go on the market soon. His hurry to move on struck me as uncharacteristic. My father had adored his mother. Why was he so eager to erase all traces of her life? 3 days after the funeral, I returned to Grandma's house alone. This place had always been filled with warmth and the smell of vanilla cookies baking in the oven. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I stepped inside, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. Everything was exactly as we had left it when we rushed Grandma to the hospital for the last time 2 weeks ago. An unfinished crossword puzzle lay open, her neat handwriting filling in only half the spaces. But somehow they seemed different now, almost watchful. Photographs of my childhood, my graduations, family holidays. Frames made of wood, silver, ceramic, all lovingly arranged throughout the house. Her closet was organized with typical precision, everything in its place. But when I reached the back, I found something unexpected. The faint smell of smoke and several small piles of ash in a metal trash can. And recently, I sifted through the ashes with my fingers but found nothing legible. Just the edges of what might have been photographs or documents, deliberately destroyed. The drawers did not close quite right, as if they had been hastily searched. Check the back of the frames, starting with the one from my 5th birthday, she had said. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the photograph and the mat board. But when I lifted the photo itself, my heart nearly stopped. 259,874. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandmother's, but the meaning was a mystery. Was this a coordinate, a code? Most contained nothing, but 3 others had similar notes hidden behind the photographs. Each had different numbers, different coordinates. In one, I found a small key taped behind a family Christmas photo. By evening, I had checked over 30 frames and found 7 hidden notes. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows, I heard a car engine outside. Moving cautiously to the window, I peeked through the curtains to see a black sedan parked across the street. A man sat inside, apparently watching the house. Grandma's warning echoed in my mind. In the guest bedroom, I found nothing unusual, but the small sewing room revealed another surprise. The padded cushion of Grandma's favorite sewing chair seemed slightly uneven. The journal was old, the pages yellowed with age. The first entry, dated May 1st, 1972, began, "Today I become Martha Johnson. My old self is dead, as she must be. Only this way can I protect what matters most." According to these entries, my grandmother had worked for some government agency during the Cold War. There were cryptic references to something called Operation Blackbird, and mentions of necessary disappearances, and protecting the family at all costs. Had my sweet cookie-baking grandmother been some kind of spy? It seemed impossible, yet the journal in my hand suggested a life far different from the one I had witnessed. I reached for my phone to call my father, needing to share this bizarre discovery. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice oddly distant. "Dad, you will not believe what I found at Grandma's house," I started. "Lauren, listen to me," he interrupted, his voice tense. "Sell the house. Pack up what you want to keep and leave the rest. Some things are better left alone." There was a long silence on the line. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. When I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I heard a faint sound from downstairs. The creak of a floorboard, so slight I might have imagined it. The window in my bedroom was open a crack, even though I was certain I had closed it. And I needed to do it now, before whoever was watching made their next move. Dawn found me exhausted but determined. The black sedan was gone, but I had no doubt it would return. I had perhaps a small window of time to act. Gathering the notes I had found behind the frames, I spread them on the kitchen table and began analyzing them more carefully. The first set of numbers was definitely coordinates. I punched them into my phone and discovered they pointed to a location in downtown Chicago, specifically to what appeared to be a bank. As for the sequence of symbols and letters, they resembled no code I recognized from my limited knowledge. But as a journalist, I had resources. Cold War era stuff. "Where did you come across this?" "Research for a story," I lied. "Not without the key. These were specifically designed to be unbreakable without proper clearance." Returning to the journal, I read more carefully, looking for any mention of Chicago or banks. Secured primary package in Chicago location today. Secondary locations established as backup. Richard handled the arrangements personally. We agreed the fewer who know, the better. Richard. I flipped through more pages, finding scattered references to several names that meant nothing to me. David turned 5 today. He remains blissfully unaware of the weight his mother carries. I pray he never has to know. David was my father's name. This confirmed the journal truly belonged to my grandmother. What had she been hiding all these years? I decided to try calling my father again. This time it did not even ring before going to voicemail. I needed to move quickly. A small one in my grandmother's bathroom that held a faded photo of a rose bush. It seemed insignificant, but I had promised myself I would be thorough. Behind this photograph, I found not a note, but a small USB drive taped securely to the backing. This was unexpected. My grandmother had barely used computers. I slipped it into my pocket alongside the key and notes. As I headed for the front door, I noticed a car slowing down outside. Not the black sedan this time, but a gray SUV with tinted windows. I ducked back inside, heart pounding. A quick glance confirmed my suspicion. Another vehicle was parked there. These people, whoever they were, had the house surrounded. How had they found me so quickly? Making a split-second decision, I turned off my phone completely and removed the battery. The morning commuters provided some cover as I boarded a bus heading downtown. I had a plan now. If my grandmother had left something in a safe deposit box, I needed to retrieve it before whoever was after me got to it first. The weight of her secret had become mine now, and I had no idea how heavy it truly was. The First National Bank of Chicago stood imposingly in the heart of the financial district. Its granite facade a testament to old money and discretion. I approached the building, cautiously scanning the street for any sign of surveillance. Nothing obvious, but that did not mean I was not being watched. I approached the customer service desk, the small key clutched tightly in my palm. Of course. Name of the account holder. The one I knew or the one from the journal? Martha Johnson, I said finally. Or possibly Caroline Fisher. And your name? Lauren Michaels. I am her granddaughter. She recently passed away. I will need to see some identification and any documentation regarding the estate. I produced my driver's license and the letter from the funeral home confirming my grandmother's death. The woman examined them carefully before nodding. She disappeared into a back office. He glanced in my direction, his expression changing subtly, before he nodded and picked up a phone. 5 minutes later, I was escorted to the safe deposit vault by a security officer. I will give you some privacy, he said, showing me to a small consultation room. Whatever was inside would change everything. Taking a deep breath, I opened the metal container. My grandmother had been wealthy, though she had lived modestly her entire life. The notebook contained what appeared to be cipher keys, presumably for decoding the encrypted messages I had found. The gun was small but looked functional, its serial number filed off. It was the manila envelope that held the real revelation. On the back was written, Caroline and Thomas, Blackbird Facility, 1969. Thomas must have been my grandfather, who I had been told died before I was born. I was so absorbed in these discoveries that I almost missed the sound of voices outside the consultation room. One of them was showing some kind of identification. The other was the silver-haired man from the funeral. For me. Quickly, I gathered the most important items. The manila envelope, the notebook, and the bankbook. I left the gun. The men turned immediately. Miss Michaels, the silver-haired man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I am Richard Hayes. I worked with your grandmother. We need to talk. I am afraid I have an appointment, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I moved toward the exit, but the second man blocked my path. This is not optional, he said quietly. What had my grandmother been involved in? I do not know what you are talking about, I said, looking for an escape route. Richard Hayes sighed. Your grandmother took something that does not belong to her. Something dangerous. We need it back. Ducking into their midst, I moved quickly toward the main lobby. Behind me I heard Hayes call out, but I did not look back. A black sedan idled at the curb, its engine running. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, weaving through pedestrians. Behind me I heard shouts. At one point, I ducked into a department store, racing through the cosmetics section and out a side entrance. They were coordinating, trying to cut me off. For nearly 20 minutes, I played this terrifying game of cat and mouse through downtown Chicago. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. Perfect. I could lose them in the crowds. Moving with purpose through the food court, I glanced back to see the two men from the bank scanning the area, speaking into what appeared to be communication devices. I ducked into a restroom, locked myself in a stall, and tried to catch my breath. Something else? Most importantly, what had my sweet, ordinary grandmother been involved in that could possibly matter to national security 50 years later? I needed answers, and I needed somewhere safe to find them. Somewhere these men would not think to look for me. I spent 3 hours in the mall, moving from store to store, always watching for my pursuers. Eventually, convinced I had lost them for now, I slipped out a service entrance and caught a taxi to a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. The desk clerk, a bored-looking young man who barely glanced up from his phone, assigned me to a room on the 3rd floor at the back of the building. Once inside, I engaged every lock and wedged a chair under the doorknob. Then I arranged simple alarm systems. A glass balanced on the inside doorknob, a line of coins along the windowsill that would scatter if disturbed. Amateur tactics perhaps, but they would alert me if someone tried to enter while I slept. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, I spread out the documents from the safe deposit box. The technical language was dense, filled with scientific terminology I barely understood. But the implications were clear enough. My grandmother's notes in the margin showed both excitement and growing concern about the applications of their research. One document marked, Eyes only detailed a meeting where program directors discuss weaponizing aspects of the technology. TB. Thomas Blackwood, my grandfather. It contained hundreds of encrypted files, but also a single video file titled For Lauren. With trembling fingers, I clicked play. My grandmother's face filled the screen. This must have been recorded years ago. "Lauren, my darling girl," she began, her voice strong and clear. "If you are watching this, then I am gone and you have found my messages. I had hoped this day would never come, that the past would remain buried, but I always knew that was unlikely. What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. In 1968, I was recruited to a classified government program called Operation Blackbird. We were developing technologies based on quantum theory that were decades beyond anything in the public sphere. Your grandfather, Thomas, was the project director. We fell in love working side by side on what we believed would change the world for the better. But as the project progressed, we discovered that military interests were guiding the research toward weapons applications, technology that could, in the wrong hands, cause unimaginable harm. Her expression hardened. In 1973, we learned the project was being transferred to a new agency with fewer ethical constraints. Your grandfather and I, along with a small group of like-minded scientists, made a decision. We would sabotage the project and secure the most dangerous research so it could never be weaponized. She leaned closer to the camera. I paused the video, overwhelmed. And my grandmother had spent the rest of her life in hiding, raising my father and then me under a false identity. Resuming the video, I watched as my grandmother explained how she had hidden copies of the research in multiple locations, ensuring that if one was discovered, others would remain secure. "I never told your father the full truth," she continued. Her eyes filled with tears. The video ended with my grandmother looking directly into the camera, her expression fierce with love. "Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie." My sweet, crossword puzzle-solving grandmother had been a government scientist turned whistleblower. Operation Blackbird had developed prototypes for technology that still does not exist in the public sphere today. No wonder my grandparents had risked everything to prevent its deployment. As night fell, I grew increasingly paranoid. Every car that pulled into the parking lot might contain the men who were hunting me. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? They would think I was delusional. So gentle I almost missed it. Freezing in place, I listened. Another knock followed by a whispered voice. I remained silent, inching toward the bathroom where I could lock myself in. Still I said nothing. Could be a trick. That decided it. Moving silently to the door, I peered through the peephole. "How do I know I can trust you?" I called through the door. But Caroline trusted me with her life, and right now I am your best chance of keeping yours. "Who are you?" I demanded. She gave me a pitying look. Grabbing my bag, I followed her down the hallway toward the emergency exit. Diana's expression confirmed my fears. They had found me. Somewhere they would never think to look for Caroline Fisher's granddaughter. As we drove through the night, I realized I had crossed a threshold. There was no going back to my normal life. Not until I understood the full scope of what my grandmother had hidden, and not until I knew what had happened to my father. The city lights faded behind us as we headed into the darkness beyond. We barely spoke during the journey. I was too overwhelmed by the day's revelations, and Diana seemed focused on ensuring our safety. Finally, well after midnight, we arrived at a small apartment building in what appeared to be a middle-class suburb. "This is one of our safe houses," she explained as we ascended. "Who exactly are you people?" Diana's expression softened slightly. "Your grandparents were not alone in their concerns about Blackbird. Several of us helped them secure the research and disappear. We formed a network, watching and waiting, ensuring the technology never resurfaced. We call ourselves the Blackbird Trust." The elevator opened directly into an apartment that looked like it had been decorated in the 1980s and never updated. Diana secured multiple locks on the door before turning on the lights. "You will be safe here for now," she said. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I lay on the uncomfortable sofa bed, my mind racing with questions. Who exactly was pursuing me? What did they want with 50-year-old research? Diana emerged from the bedroom, a gun in her hand. "Who is it?" she called. "It is Richard," came the reply. "I am alone." Diana checked a security monitor I had not noticed before. then unlocked the door with obvious reluctance. "You," I gasped, scrambling to my feet. "How did you find us?" Richard Hayes looked older in the harsh morning light. "We were colleagues once." Hayes raised his hand slightly. "Explain what?" I demanded. "How you have been hunting my grandmother for decades. How you are probably responsible for my father's disappearance." "Your father is safe, Lauren. He is being held at a secure location while we resolve this situation. Just as we tried to protect your grandmother all these years." Diana scoffed. "Is that what you call it? Protection?" Hayes sighed heavily, looking suddenly very tired. "May I sit down? This is a long story, and at my age, standing for extended periods is uncomfortable." Diana nodded curtly, but kept the gun ready. "First, let me introduce myself properly," he began. He leaned forward. "Lauren, what do you think happened the night your grandparents took the Blackbird files? My grandmother told me you were weaponizing technology that was too dangerous. They tried to stop it, and my grandfather was killed." Hayes nodded slowly. "That is partially true. The technology was being transitioned to military applications, yes. Your grandparents objected, yes. But what your grandmother may not have known, could not have known, was that Thomas was working with us." He looked at Diana. Diana lowered her gun slightly. "Because the consortium never stopped looking," Hayes replied. He turned back to me. "For 50 years we have maintained this delicate balance. Martha Johnson lived a quiet life, raised a son, loved a granddaughter. Meanwhile, we kept the consortium at bay, feeding them false leads, misdirecting their resources. Why not just let the secrets die with her?" Hayes's expression darkened. "Because 3 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting the consortium had finally located Martha Johnson. We tried to warn your grandmother indirectly, but by then her illness was advanced. When she died, we knew they would come for the files she had hidden. We needed to secure them first." "I am saying the situation is more complex than your grandmother understood," Hayes replied carefully. "We are not perfect, but we have been trying to protect the same things she was. The misuse of technology that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the world. Some yes. Others are private security contractors we trust. We needed to move quickly once we realized Lauren had found the safety deposit box." "You have a strange definition of protection." Hayes smiled thinly. She checked it, her expression growing alarmed. "Multiple vehicles approaching." Hayes stood quickly. "Why should I trust you?" I challenged, even as Diana began gathering equipment from around the apartment. "How do I know this is not some elaborate trick to get the files?" They were both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. "Thomas was my best friend," he said quietly. "I promised him I would protect his family if anything happened to him. I have kept that promise for 50 years. I am asking you to trust me now so I can continue to keep it." Diana checked the security monitor again. I looked from Hayes to Diana, then back at the photograph in my hand. My instincts were divided, but one thing was clear. Staying put was not an option. "Where is my father?" I demanded. "That," said Hayes, "will be your decision. Once you understand everything, you can decide their fate. But right now we need to survive this encounter. Get me to my father. Then we will talk about the files." Hayes nodded briskly, turning to Diana. "Is the tunnel access still operational?" "Yes, but they will be watching the exits." "Not all of them," Hayes replied cryptically. Diana's eyes widened. Hayes turned to me. "Lauren, gather your things. We are leaving." Whether I was making the right choice remained to be seen. Diana led the way with Hayes behind me, ensuring I remained between them as we moved quickly through the passageway. "This was built during the Cold War," Diana explained over her shoulder. "Part of a network of evacuation routes for government officials in case of nuclear attack." "Smart strategy." Diana shot him a look that suggested their history was complicated. "We did what was necessary to protect ourselves from people like you, Richard." Diana hesitated, consulting what appeared to be an old paper map. "The east exit will be compromised by now," Hayes said. "Not if Protocol 7 is activated. It should provide enough of a distraction." Diana still looked uncertain but nodded reluctantly. "North Passage it is." As we continued, I gathered my courage to ask the question that had been burning in my mind. A contingency plan, Hayes replied vaguely. Hayes checked his watch, then removed what looked like a small remote control from his pocket. He pressed a button on the remote. Now, Hayes commanded. Diana climbed the ladder swiftly, pushing open a hatch above. I followed, emerging into what appeared to be a maintenance shed behind a row of shops. Controlled detonations, Hayes assured me. Smoke bombs and targeted EMP devices. No one will be injured, but it will keep the consortium busy while we escape. All clear, sir. Extraction team reports consortium forces are fully engaged with the diversions. I could not simply follow blindly anymore, regardless of the danger. Before we go anywhere, I said firmly, I need assurances. Real ones, not just words. That can be arranged, Hayes agreed. Hayes and Diana exchanged glances. The files would be secured in a classified archive, Hayes said carefully. Not good enough, I countered. What do you propose? Hayes asked, his tone a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I had been thinking about this since watching my grandmother's video. The files contain decryption keys that can only be accessed with multiple authorized signatures. I want a legally binding agreement that the files will be divided, with different portions held by different agencies, including international oversight organizations. No single entity should have access to the complete research. Hayes seemed to be calculating the feasibility of my demand. That would require significant diplomatic arrangements, he said finally. Agent Cooper drove us to a small private airfield outside the city. A jet waited on the tarmac, engines already running. Change of plans, he announced after hanging up. Diana peered through binoculars toward the jet. I count for individuals who do not belong armed, pretending to be ground crew. Hayes cursed under his breath. That was when I realized this was my moment. Both sides wanted what I had. What are you planning? After 3 rings, a voice answered. I looked to Diana, who provided the coordinates. Stand by, the voice said. Authentication confirmed. Extraction team en route. It is 17 minutes. I hung up and returned the phone to Hayes, who looked both impressed and concerned. You accessed the Trust's emergency protocols, Diana said, clearly surprised. For the first time, I saw respect in Hayes's eyes. One created a diversion at the airfield while the other landed near our position. 4 armed individuals in civilian clothing emerged, securing the perimeter before waving us forward. Miss Michaels, one of them approached me directly. Lauren, think carefully. If you go with them, I am not going with either side exclusively, I interrupted. Wilson looked uncertain. That was not our mission parameters. Tell them I am proposing a joint operation between the Trust and Director Hayes's organization. Mutual oversight, mutual accountability. Or perhaps after 50 years of a shadow conflict, they were simply exhausted. Our reunion was emotional, filled with revelations on both sides. He had known fragments of his mother's past but had protected me from the knowledge, just as she had protected him. International agreements were drafted, oversight committees formed. The consortium made one final attempt to obtain the files, but faced with the combined resources of the Trust and U.S. intelligence agencies, they were finally neutralized. 6 months after my grandmother's death, I returned to her house. It stood empty, waiting for new owners. I had decided not to sell it after all, but to keep it as a reminder of the extraordinary woman who had lived an ordinary life there. In the back of her closet, I found one final frame I had somehow missed during my initial search. It contained a photograph of my grandmother holding me as a baby, her expression one of fierce love and determination. When I turned it over and removed the backing, I found her final message to me. As I stood in the empty house, I finally understood the profound lesson my grandmother had taught me. Our lives are framed not just by the truths we know, but by the questions we choose to ask and the courage we find to face the answers. I didn't just write a book. I established a foundation in my grandparents' names, dedicated to promoting ethical scientific development, ensuring that the brilliant minds of the future would never face the impossible choices they did. The house, once a place of secrets, is now filled with light and laughter again. My father and I host holidays there, surrounded by new friends and old allies, our family redefined and stronger than ever. If you've ever suspected there was more to your family history than what you were told, let me know in the comments. Like this video if you believe that some truths, no matter how difficult, are worth fighting for. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the unexpected turns life can take.